The world had changed so much that even the memory of war had faded. Generations were born and raised in peace. Cities stretched high into the sky, powered by clean energy and guarded by nothing more than hope. Children grew up learning about stars, art, and science, not about fear or survival. For them, war was just something written in old history books or shown in dull documentaries. People looked back at the past with disbelief, wondering how their ancestors could have lived with so much destruction. The world had become soft, quiet, and calm, a paradise built on the promise that nothing could ever go wrong again. On the edges of this peaceful earth stood massive hangars, forgotten by most, their doors sealed for decades. Inside them rested the old machines of war, heavy, silent, and covered in dust. Their metal bodies had once shaken the ground and darkened the sky. Now they stood still, useless relics of an age no one wanted to remember. Birds built nests on their weapons, vines crept over their armor, and the wind was the only sound that moved through their halls. Humanity had locked away not only its machines but also its instincts, the courage, the aggression, and the fierce unity that had once made them unbeatable. The soldiers who had once commanded those machines were now gray-haired or long gone. Their stories were fading like the ink of old journals. When they spoke of sacrifice and duty, the younger generation smiled politely, unable to truly understand. To them, courage was about standing up for opinions online, not facing death on the battlefield. The old warriors sometimes sat together in silence, drinking and staring at the stars, wondering if peace had made humanity stronger or weaker. Deep down, they feared that in chasing comfort, their people had lost something vital, the fire that had once kept them alive. Yet life on Earth continued smoothly. Technology had made everything easy. Food grew in towers, machines did most of the work, and no one ever worried about safety. The world's leaders promised that the age of war was over forever. They spoke about unity, progress, and love between planets. And indeed, humanity had reached far. They had colonies on other worlds, trading goods and knowledge with peace and pride. People believed they were unstoppable in their progress, not through violence but through peace. They thought they had outgrown the need for weapons and warriors, but somewhere far from Earth a different truth was waiting. Space, cold and endless, does not care about human dreams. In its darkness, other species watched and waited. Some were curious, some were afraid, and some were hungry. But for now, the people of Earth didn't know that. They laughed, danced, and built, while the universe around them stirred with movements they could not yet see. In the quiet neighborhoods of Earth, families gathered for dinner without fear. Children looked up at the stars and imagined adventure, not danger. Lovers walked under glowing city lights, never thinking those same lights might one day guide ships of war. Even the media had forgotten the word invasion. The idea that anyone could harm humanity again seemed impossible. The planet's defense systems were minimal. Satellites watched the skies, but mostly for asteroids, not enemies. The once mighty armies of Earth had been reduced to ceremonial guards, their uniforms bright and clean, their weapons rarely fired. The War Academy had become a museum. Visitors came to take pictures with old tanks and robots, smiling beside machines that had once killed thousands. Still, there were a few who couldn't let go of the past. In small corners of the world, hidden away from the shining cities, veterans and historians gathered to preserve the stories of human courage. They spoke of battles fought not for power, but for survival. They kept the memory alive even when no one wanted to listen. These people were laughed at, called paranoid, old-fashioned, or stuck in the past. But they knew something the others didn't. Peace, though beautiful, was fragile. And if ever it broke, humanity would have to remember how to fight again. There was an energy in the air that few could sense. A strange quiet before something unknown. Even though Earth was filled with laughter, art, and endless discovery, somewhere deep inside the human spirit, something ancient slept. A power, a fury, a strength born not from hate, but from survival. It was buried under layers of peace and comfort, but it was still there, waiting for a reason to awaken. The scientists who looked at the stars sometimes spoke of strange signals, small movements far out in space. But the government ignored them. They said it was nothing, just cosmic noise. Why worry when everything was perfect? Yet among those scientists, one man couldn't shake off the feeling that something was coming. He had read the old war files, seen the scars of the planet's history, and he feared that humanity's peace had made it blind. Meanwhile, in those long-abandoned hangars, the old war machines stood in silence. Their cold metal frames carried memories of pilots who never returned, of victories and losses, of blood and hope. They were not alive, yet there was something almost watchful about them, as if they remembered the humans who once guided them through fire and destruction. Dust covered their sensors, but deep within their cores, faint traces of energy still existed, flickering weakly like dying embers. And in that quiet world, humanity dreamed on. They looked at their achievements with pride. No wars, no hunger, no fear. But the truth was simple. They had not destroyed their warlike nature. They had only put it to sleep. They had built a peaceful world on the backs of those who once fought to make it possible, and now that generation was fading away, taking with it the stories of how close humanity had once come to extinction, and how they had survived through unity and sacrifice. As the last rays of the sun fell on the silent military graveyards, the wind whispered through broken helmets and rusted blades. Somewhere far beyond the stars, an unknown signal began its journey. A cry for help, a desperate call traveling across the void. It was still far from Earth, but it was coming, carrying with it the truth that peace is never permanent. The universe would soon remind humanity of what they truly were. For now, the world remained silent, but the silence was not peace. It was the calm before something vast, something terrible, something that would test every part of what it meant to be human. The Earth slept peacefully, unaware that its greatest strength, its warriors, its courage, its unity, was only sleeping, not gone. The Titans were asleep, deep within the heart of humanity, waiting for a voice that would one day awaken them again. It was an ordinary night on Earth. The cities shone under silver moons, and space stations quietly orbited above, sending peaceful data back to the planet. Scientists monitored weather patterns, communication signals, and deep space transmissions as they always did. Everything was calm. The people of Earth believed nothing could disturb their peace anymore. But then, in the stillness of space, something broke through the silence. A strange sound, faint at first, but desperate. It was a distress signal. The message repeated again and again, carried by radio waves across the endless dark. It came from a distant colony named Eden 9, one of humanity's proudest settlements, a planet full of beauty and promise. Eden 9 had once been called the Garden Beyond the Stars. It was a world where humans had built glittering cities beside crystal lakes, where children played under twin suns. But now its voice trembled with fear. At first, the scientists thought it was a mistake. Signals sometimes got scrambled in space. Static, solar storms, or system malfunctions could cause strange sounds. But this was different. When they cleaned the noise and decoded the message, every technician froze. The words were broken and choked by panic. "This is Eden 9. Under attack. Unknown species. They are consuming everything. We need help. Please help us." Then came screams, human screams. Explosions echoed in the background. The signal ended abruptly, leaving only silence. The operators stared at each other, unsure if what they heard was real. The news spread quickly to Earth's Communication Council. Meetings were called in the middle of the night. Government leaders, military officers, and scientists gathered around holographic maps, replaying the audio again and again. Some said it was fake. Others believed it was a natural disaster. But deep inside, everyone felt it, fear. For the first time in generations, Earth had received an SOS, the public soon found out. Every news channel played the same broken message from Eden 9. Reporters spoke in trembling voices. The people who had always believed humanity was safe began to question everything. How could there be an attack? From whom? Humanity hadn't faced an enemy in centuries. They had no army ready, no strategy, no memory of how to fight. The governments of Earth began endless discussions. Should they send help? Should they risk lives? Some argued that it might be a trap. Others said Eden 9 was too far away, that by the time help reached, it would be too late. The leaders hesitated, afraid of starting a war that no one was prepared for. But while the politicians debated, something else was happening, something powerful. The people of Earth were watching, and their hearts were breaking. The final part of the message, a woman's voice crying, "Please don't forget us," was replayed millions of times. It touched something deep in every human heart. Families, workers, veterans, even children began to feel a strange mix of anger and sadness. Humanity had built great ships, strong technology, and vast colonies. Yet they were letting their own people die in fear. That thought burned like fire inside them. In small towns and spaceports, and even in the forgotten military bases, the old warriors began to stir. The veterans who had once fought the last wars turned on their old communication links, their hands shaking with age but hearts filled with purpose. They knew what the others had forgotten, that when a cry for help comes, humanity does not turn away. Meanwhile, the signal kept repeating, weaker each time as Eden 9 systems failed. Some ships passing through nearby space tried to respond but were destroyed before they could send back information. The little that came through painted a terrifying picture. Creatures of unknown origin moving like shadows, devouring everything they touched. Machines, humans, even the land itself. No negotiation, no mercy, just silence and destruction. On Earth, young soldiers who had only trained in simulations started to volunteer for rescue missions. They had never seen real war, but the fire inside them was real. The call of Eden 9 was no longer just a distant voice. It became a heartbeat echoing through humanity. Artists painted it, musicians wrote songs about it, and poets cried for the lost colony. The world that had once been numb began to feel again. Inside old military facilities, retired generals returned. They dusted off old maps, reviewed forgotten tactics, and opened files that hadn't been touched in 100 years. Some of them cried when they saw the faces of their fallen comrades in those files. They knew what was coming, the end of peace, and the return of the old world they had hoped to leave behind. In space control centers, engineers worked tirelessly to track the source of the SOS. The distance was great, but the route was clear. All it needed was courage. The courage to leave safety behind. At first, the government still refused. But the people began to protest. They demanded that ships be sent. They said humanity must never abandon its own. Then one night, another piece of the message was recovered. It was the final recording from the commander of Eden 9's defense. His voice was calm but filled with sorrow. If anyone hears this, we fought till the end. We are losing. They are beyond anything we've seen. But tell Earth, tell them, we need them to remember who they are. That single line shook the world. Remember who you are. It became a phrase on every screen, in every home, in every heart. Humanity realized that peace had made them forget their strength. But now, that strength was needed again. In one hidden base deep beneath the mountains, a young officer named Reyna found the old control codes for the Titan fleet, ancient warships that had been shut down long ago. She was not a soldier. She was a historian working in archives. But when she listened to the SOS, she felt something inside her awaken. She broke the old access locks and sent a message to the global command, saying the Titans could still fly, if someone dared to bring them back. Her message spread like wildfire. Soon, other engineers and pilots joined her. They came from every part of Earth, scientists, veterans, dreamers, people who still believed in humanity's promise to protect its own. The government could no longer stop them. What started as a whisper became a movement. Across the planet, lights turned on in long-forgotten hangars. Giant machines powered up for the first time in centuries, their engines trembling with new life. Soldiers trained again, not out of hate but duty. Scientists rebuilt communication arrays. The world that had been sleeping began to wake, but the enemy was not waiting. Far away, Eden 9's final signal came, a transmission of silence. No more voices, no more cries, just static and ashes. The people wept. The colony was gone. But in that sorrow, humanity found something far greater: unity. They realized they had lost Eden 9, but they would not lose another world. The SOS had not just been a call for help. It had been a reminder, a spark that reignited the old fire in every human soul. It reminded them that peace is not the absence of strength, but the balance of it. It reminded them that when one human suffers, all must rise. And so, while the stars shone cold above, the earth that had slept for generations finally began to awaken. The silence of the past was replaced with the hum of engines, the roar of factories, and the heartbeat of billions moving with one purpose. Humanity would answer that SOS, not just for Eden 9, but for themselves. For deep within every human heart, something ancient was stirring, something that had been quiet for too long. The Titans were still asleep, but the call had been heard. And soon, Very soon, the universe would remember what happens when humanity is called to war. The world had not seen such movement in 100 years. After the SOS from Eden 9, something powerful had awakened inside every human being. The hesitation and fear that once filled their hearts were replaced by determination. Earth, which had slept for decades in peaceful dreams, now began to stir like a giant remembering its strength. The old military bases covered in dust and silence opened their heavy doors again. Engineers, soldiers, and volunteers flooded inside. Machines that had been sleeping for generations began to hum with life as power was restored. The forgotten halls echoed with footsteps and voices full of purpose. Humanity was awakening. Factories that once produced farming drones and transport ships now switched back to building war machines. Huge screens that had once displayed news and art now showed battle simulations and defense plans. The world had changed overnight. No one ordered it, yet everyone seemed to know what needed to be done. The message from Eden 9 had reached deep into their souls. Humanity was not just rebuilding weapons, it was rebuilding courage. In one of the old spaceports, a young technician named Aiden stood in awe as the ancient Titan ship, Leviathan, powered up. The ground shook beneath his feet, and the air filled with the smell of burning metal. The ship had been locked for more than a century, a relic from wars that most people only knew through history books. But as the engines roared, it felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that these machines were not just made of steel but of human will. Around him, crews cheered and cried. They had brought a sleeping giant back to life. The veterans who had once fought the old wars returned as teachers. Their hair was gray, their hands scarred, but their eyes burned with pride. They taught the young how to pilot, how to think, how to fight, not with hate but with discipline and unity. The training grounds that had once been empty now echoed with the shouts of thousands of new recruits. For the first time in generations, humanity remembered how to stand together for something greater than themselves. In laboratories across Earth and the colonies, scientists worked day and night. They studied the fragments of the Eden 9 transmission, trying to understand what had attacked the colony. The images they found were horrifying. Creatures that moved like shadows, fast and endless, feeding on energy and life. They realized that this enemy could not be reasoned with. It was not a civilization, but a swarm. The scientists sent warnings to every human settlement. Prepare yourselves. They are coming. The governments, once slow and divided, now united. Borders that had separated nations disappeared overnight. Every country, every colony, every shipyard became part of one massive effort. They called it Project Dawnfire, a name that symbolized the return of the light in humanity's darkest hour. For the first time in history, humanity was not fighting each other. They were fighting for each other. Among those leading the preparations was Reyna, the historian who had rediscovered the Titan fleet's control codes. She had never been a soldier, but now she stood among admirals and commanders guiding the reactivation of the ancient war machines. Her calm voice became a symbol of hope. "We are not awakening these Titans to destroy," she said, "but to protect what is left of us." Her words spread across the planet like wildfire. They appeared on posters, broadcasts, and military insignias. Reyna became the voice of the new age, the age of awakening. Soon the first of the Titans rose into the sky. They were enormous machines, each one the size of a mountain, designed for both space and land combat. Their armor glowed with blue energy as they connected to the power grids that once fed them. One by one they came to life: Leviathan, Vanguard, Odyssey, and Helios. When they moved, the ground trembled. When they spoke through their communication lines, their voices thundered like gods. People all over Earth stopped to watch the skies as the Titans flew again. Children waved, tears shining in their eyes. The stories their grandparents had told them were no longer just stories. They were alive again. But the awakening was not just in machines. The human spirit itself began to change. Those who had once lived simple, peaceful lives now found purpose in service. Mechanics, doctors, farmers, artists, everyone found a way to help. Factories turned into armories. Research centers became command hubs. Even schools began teaching survival and teamwork instead of luxury and comfort. Humanity had become one great machine, every person a part of its strength. In space, fleets began to form. Hundreds of ships, some old, some new, gathered in orbit around Earth. The once silent shipyards were now alive with light and motion. The stars above the planet glowed brighter each night as the number of ships increased. The sound of engines, the hum of energy fields, and the endless chatter of engineers filled the void. The human race was preparing not just for war, but for survival. Still, fear lingered. Many knew that the enemy which destroyed Eden 9 might be far stronger than they imagined. No one had seen them face to face. The images and signals showed horrors beyond understanding. Some nights, when the training fields went quiet, soldiers would look up at the stars and wonder if they would survive what was coming. But the fear did not stop them. It only made their resolve stronger. On one of those quiet nights, Reyna stood at the edge of the Titan hangar, watching the massive machines glow under the moonlight. She thought about Eden 9, the families lost, the children who would never come home. Her heart ached, but she whispered to herself, "You did not die for nothing." Behind her, the crew continued their work, their faces lit by determination. The awakening of the Titans was more than the return of machines. It was the rebirth of faith in humanity's power to rise again. In the following days, the newly trained soldiers were given their assignments. The first fleet, named the Guardian Line, would travel toward the edge of human space, where Eden 9 had once been. Their mission was not only to investigate, but to stand as Earth's shield. The second fleet would guard the remaining colonies, and the third would stay to defend Earth itself. Every launch was watched by millions. As the ships disappeared into the dark, people prayed, hoping their courage would be enough. Back on Earth, the skies began to change. The once calm blue atmosphere was now marked with streaks of fire as ships launched into orbit. The old war songs were played again, not as cries of destruction, but as songs of unity. In every corner of the planet, people whispered the same words, "We remember." It was no longer just about revenge for Eden 9. It was about proving that humanity could not be broken. Even the old veterans who had once feared that their kind of strength was lost forever smiled when they saw the young soldiers march. They could see it in their eyes, the same fire that had once burned in theirs. Humanity had changed, yes, but its core remained the same. When the time came to protect what they loved, they would rise as one. The awakening continued. Deep beneath the oceans, hidden facilities powered up long-forgotten submarines. On the moon, old mining stations were transformed into weapon foundries. Mars, once quiet and red, now blazed with new activity as colonists built defense turrets and training camps. Every corner of human civilization was alive. It felt like the entire species had remembered who they were. And yet, as powerful as this awakening was, there was a heavy silence that followed. No one knew when the enemy would strike again. No one knew if the Titans would be enough. The people prayed that they would not be too late. But for the first time in a long time, they were not afraid to face the unknown. The fear of helplessness had turned into the strength of readiness. The Earth, once asleep in comfort, was now awake with purpose. The skies burned with engines, the oceans echoed with metal giants, and the ground trembled with footsteps of soldiers preparing for war. Humanity, once divided by peace, was united by danger. They were no longer the dreamers of soft worlds. They were the Titans of the old spirit reborn. And far away in the endless darkness of space, something moved. The enemy that had destroyed Eden 9 was watching. They had seen the awakening. They had felt the vibrations of Earth's preparation. And for the first time they hesitated, because they too remembered something, the legend of the species that never gave up, the creatures who, even in their weakest moments, could rise again with fire in their hearts. Humanity was awake, and the universe would soon remember why it once feared the war giants of Earth. The sky above Eden 9 burned red when the human fleets arrived. The colony that had once been called the Garden Beyond the Stars was now nothing but ashes and flame. Smoke rose like black mountains, and pieces of destroyed buildings floated through the thin atmosphere. From space, the planet looked wounded, covered in scars that glowed like fire veins. The last transmission from Eden 9 had ended days ago, but still, the people of Earth came. They came not for conquest, but for the promise they had made, to answer the cry for help no matter the cost. As the first human ships entered orbit, silence filled the communication lines. Every soldier, every pilot, every commander stared at the sight below. It was worse than they had imagined. Entire cities were gone. Oceans had boiled away, and across the dead land something moved. Creatures dark as night, crawling and spreading like living shadows. They were enormous, taller than buildings, their bodies made of strange matter that shifted like smoke and metal combined. They were feeding, absorbing energy from the ruins. Whatever they were, they had come not to conquer but to consume. Admiral Corrin, the leader of the Guardian Line fleet, stood on the bridge of the flagship Vanguard. His voice was calm but filled with sorrow. "We're too late to save them," he said quietly, "but not too late to make them pay." His words echoed through every ship. Orders were given, engines flared, and the first human attack in centuries began. Thousands of fighter ships launched from carriers, their engines glowing blue against the darkness. The Titans, the massive war machines of Earth, descended through the clouds like falling stars. The ground shook as they landed, their footsteps sending waves of dust across the battlefield. When the enemy turned toward them, the world seemed to pause. For a moment, time itself held its breath. Then the war began. The first shots exploded through the air. Plasma fire cut through the creatures' dark forms, tearing them apart. But only for seconds. The creatures reformed, shifting their shapes and attacking with blinding energy. They screamed, not with sound but with a vibration that made the soldiers' bones ache. Entire squads were lost in moments, swallowed by the darkness. But humanity did not stop. They regrouped, adapted, and fought harder. Every time a human fell, another took their place. From the Leviathan, Aiden, the young technician who had helped bring the ship back to life, now worked as a combat engineer. He watched the chaos unfold on the main screens. His hands shook, but his heart burned with determination. He had never seen real war before, yet he knew this was what he was meant to do. "For Eden 9, he whispered, activating the Titan's main cannon. The blast ripped through the largest creature, splitting it into pieces that burned in the air. The crew cheered, but their joy lasted only a second. The pieces began to move again, forming new monsters from the wreckage. Admiral Corrin clenched his fists. "They're learning," he said. "They're adapting to our weapons." Humanity was facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever known. Yet the more the creatures changed, the more humans adapted in return. Pilots began to coordinate their attacks, using teamwork and sacrifice to outsmart the enemy. They formed trap zones, luring the beasts into open areas where the Titans could strike with full power. It was brutal and chaotic, but slowly the tide began to shift. Down on the surface, the Titans fought side by side. Each step they took shook the land. Helios fired burning rays of light that sliced through the shadows. Odyssey created shields to protect fallen soldiers. Vanguard and Leviathan pushed forward together, tearing through enemy lines with massive energy blades. The sky was filled with explosions, the ground covered with glowing debris. The air smelled of metal, ash, and victory. Reyna watched everything from the command ship orbiting above. She had never wanted to see war return, but as she looked at the brave souls below, she felt both sorrow and pride. Humanity had remembered who they were. They were no longer the peaceful dreamers who believed danger was gone. They were warriors again, fighters who protected life with their blood. Hours turned into days. The battle raged without rest. The creatures attacked in endless waves, each one stronger than the last. Humanity lost thousands, but they never gave up. When one Titan fell, its pilots triggered self-destruction, taking hundreds of enemies with them. When ammunition ran low, soldiers used whatever they could find. Broken metal, burning fuel, even their own bodies as shields. They fought not just for survival, but for memory, for the people of Eden 9 whose voices still echoed in their minds. Then came the moment no one expected. From the depths of the planet rose a creature so massive that it blotted out the sun. It was taller than mountains, its body pulsing with energy like a living storm. The soldiers stared in horror. The sensors called it the Devourer. It was the source of the swarm, the heart of the darkness that had destroyed Eden 9. Every smaller creature stopped and turned toward it. As if answering to their master, Admiral Corrin knew this was it, the final fight. He ordered every ship to focus fire on the creature, but the blasts barely scratched its surface. The Devourer unleashed a beam of pure destruction, cutting through 3 human ships in one strike. The shockwave hit Vanguard, throwing Corrin and his crew to the ground. Systems failed, alarms screamed, and fire spread through the bridge. But even as the ship shook apart, Corrin stood tall. "We do not retreat," he shouted. "We fight until the last breath. Humanity does not run." His words reignited every fighter's spirit. Across the fleet, voices shouted the same cry. "For humanity! For Eden 9!" The Titans on the surface joined forces. They linked their energy cores, forming a single massive power surge. It was dangerous, it could destroy them all, but it was their only chance. Aiden and his crew worked frantically to channel the energy through Leviathan's central cannon. "Do it now," Reyna ordered from orbit. All Titans fire together. The sky exploded with light. A beam of white fire cut through the darkness, hitting the devourer in the chest. The creature screamed, a sound that shook space itself. It fought back, but the combined power of humanity's machines and hearts was stronger. One by one, the Titans began to break apart, their energy cores overloading. Aiden's voice trembled as he shouted, "It's working!" "Don't stop." Flames spread around him, but he didn't care. The light grew brighter and brighter until the entire planet seemed to burn. Then silence. When the light faded, the battlefield was still. The devourer was gone, reduced to ash and shadow. The surviving humans stood among the ruins, exhausted and trembling. Many ships were destroyed, many Titans gone forever. The ground was littered with both human and alien remains. But for the first time since the SOS, there was peace. The stars above Eden 9 shone quietly again. In orbit, Reyna watched the broken fleet drift among the clouds. Her eyes filled with tears. "They did it," she whispered. "They remembered." On the bridge beside her, Admiral Corrin leaned against the railing, his uniform torn, his body weak, but his heart full. "We've lost much," he said softly. "But we've found ourselves again." The survivors gathered their fallen and sent them back to Earth with honor. Every soldier was treated as a hero, every Titan name remembered. The message was clear. Eden 9 was gone, but its spirit had awakened something eternal. Humanity had once again proven that when the darkness comes, they do not surrender. They fight together, even when all hope seems lost. The fleets returned home in silence, carrying the weight of victory and loss. As they entered Earth's orbit, billions of people looked up at the sky. They saw the returning ships and knew that the legends were true. The sleeping war Titans had awakened. The cheers that followed echoed across the planet, louder than any celebration before. Aiden's name, Reyna's courage, and Corrin's final stand became part of history. Songs were written about them. Children learned their stories in schools. Humanity had paid a terrible price, but in doing so, they had rediscovered their unity, their fire and their strength. Far away, in the silent corners of space, other civilizations listened to the echoes of that battle. They had heard of the humans, fragile, emotional, unpredictable, but now they understood the truth. Humanity might sleep, they might forget, but when the call comes, they awaken with the fury of gods. The universe would remember this day as the day the Titans returned, the day humanity, once peaceful and quiet, became unstoppable again. The war had finally ended, but the world was no longer the same. Cities that once touched the sky were now broken silhouettes against the horizon. The oceans carried the wreckage of war, and the land bore scars that would take centuries to heal. Yet amidst the ruins, life stirred again. Smoke slowly faded, and for the first time in months, the world heard something new. Silence. Not the silence of death, but the silence of relief. The war that had shaken the universe was over, and humanity had survived. But survival had come at a cost no one could ever measure. The SOS signal that had once cried out in desperation had become a legend. It was the spark that had awakened the old war Titans, both the machines and the spirit of humanity itself. And now, as the dust settled, people began to realize what they had lost and what they had rediscovered. For the first time in centuries, humans had seen their true strength again. The war had not just been a battle against the invaders. It had been a battle against their own forgetfulness. They had remembered who they were: fighters, builders, dreamers, survivors. Across the ruined continents, survivors gathered to rebuild. The old generals, the same men and women who had been forgotten before the war, now stood at the center of every new council. Their eyes were tired but proud. They had seen the worst of the universe and the best of humanity. The young soldiers who had followed them looked up to them like heroes from another time. And in a way they were, relics of a forgotten age that had risen again to save the world. The machines, too, had played their part. The great war Titans that had slept for generations now stood silent once more. Their metal armor was cracked, their cores burned out. But their presence alone reminded everyone of the miracle that had happened. People began to build monuments around them, not as symbols of destruction, but of awakening. They called them the Guardians of Earth. Some of the Titans had fallen during battle, their colossal bodies resting like mountains over destroyed lands. Instead of removing them, humanity built their new cities around them. They became part of the landscape, a reminder that peace must be protected, not just enjoyed. In one of these rebuilt cities, Dr. Elena Voss walked through the ruins of her old lab. It was there, long ago, that she had decoded the alien SOS signal. It had been her discovery that started it all. The awakening, the defense, the war. She had lost friends, family, and years of peace, yet she did not regret it. She stood before the remains of her communication tower, now surrounded by vines and ash, and whispered, "We heard you, and we became something more." The survivors had also learned something new about the universe. The invaders, the unknown species who had sent the SOS, were not all dead. Some had survived, just like the humans, and to everyone's surprise, when the last battle ended, both sides stopped fighting. There was no final explosion, no surrender speech, just silence and exhaustion. The war had burned away the hatred. They had both realized that they were not enemies anymore, but survivors of the same nightmare. In the days that followed, small groups from both sides met among the ruins. They did not have words for peace, but they shared food, water, and pain. Sometimes that was enough. Humanity now faced a new kind of challenge, not to fight, but to rebuild. The leaders of the world gathered under the broken stars and formed a new alliance, one that was not about nations or flags. The old boundaries had vanished in the war. Now Earth was one, a planet united not by fear, but by shared survival. The new government was called the Union of Dawn, a name chosen to mark the rebirth of civilization. Their mission was simple yet powerful: never forget. They swore that humanity would never again sleep while danger grew in the dark. In schools, children learned not just about peace, but about balance. Teachers told them stories of the old soldiers who had awakened when the SOS was heard. They learned about sacrifice, bravery, and unity. The once forgotten veterans became living legends, their words written into new textbooks. Humanity's history was no longer about shame for the past, but pride in what they had become. The sleeping titans were now part of festivals, their images carved into walls and holograms as reminders of strength. Yet, even as humanity celebrated its survival, there were those who couldn't forget the faces of the lost. Cemeteries stretched for miles. Families visited graves of loved ones whose bodies were never found. They left flowers, pieces of old armor, or simple words written on paper. "You fought so we could live." And in the quiet moments of night, many wondered if peace would truly last this time. The stars above, once beautiful and distant, now carried memories of fire and destruction. But humanity was different now. The war had changed them. They no longer looked at the universe with pride alone. They looked with respect. They had learned that peace was not something that happened by itself. It had to be protected, defended, and earned. The sleeping war titans were no longer hidden or forgotten. Instead, they were kept in special sanctuaries, powered and maintained not for attack, but for defense, a promise that humanity would never again be caught sleeping. In one of those sanctuaries stood Titan 09, the largest of all. It had been the first to awaken when the SOS reached Earth. Now it stood quiet, its chest plate engraved with the names of those who had fallen beside it. Every year, on the anniversary of the awakening, people gathered around it to pray and remember. They didn't worship the machine. They honored the spirit it represented, the strength that lies within every human heart when everything else fails. Elena often visited Titan 09 too. She would stand before it feeling small and human, yet strangely connected. She had once believed that technology alone could save humanity. But the war had taught her something greater, that machines may fight, but it is the human spirit that truly wins. She often told the new generation of scientists that the greatest weapon is not made of metal, but of courage and unity. As the years passed, the stars once again became symbols of hope, not fear. Humanity began exploring space again, but this time with wisdom. Every new planet they visited, they carried a message carved in steel. "We come in peace, but we are awake." It became their motto, a declaration to the universe that Earth was no longer the sleeping world it once was. Even the alien survivors who had fought against them eventually joined in rebuilding efforts. Together, they built research colonies on the moons and shared knowledge about technology and healing. Slowly, enemies turned into allies and the scars between species began to fade. But still, in the deep corners of space, dangers remained. Humanity knew that darkness would always exist somewhere, yet they no longer feared it. They had learned that fear only wins when courage sleeps. And so they kept their titans not as tools of war, but as symbols, sleeping giants ready to defend peace if ever the universe forgot what it had learned. One evening, as the sun set over the rebuilt Earth, a small group of children stood before the monument of the first SOS signal. It was a simple structure, a tall spire with a glowing light at its tip, representing the message that had awakened them all. One child asked his teacher, "Will the Titans ever wake up again?" The teacher smiled and said, "Only if we forget who we are." The children stared at the light, their faces calm, but filled with wonder. They didn't yet understand the full meaning of those words, but someday they would. And so humanity moved forward, stronger, wiser, and no longer asleep. The SOS that had once been a cry of despair had become a song of remembrance. It had awakened not just machines, but hearts, and it would echo forever. A reminder that even in peace, vigilance must live. The Titans slept once more, but this time they were not forgotten. They rested, like guardians watching over a world that had finally learned to balance strength with peace. The stars shone bright that night, reflecting off the metallic frames of the Titans. The world was calm, rebuilt, and alive, and somewhere deep within the quiet circuits of the old machines, a pulse of light flickered, not as a warning, but as a heartbeat. Humanity was awake, and as long as it stayed awake, no darkness in the universe could ever defeat it again.